Well, well, well. Look who's sticking around to check out the newest episode of Hanna Wonders, where Hanna wonders about all things theater. I'm so happy to have you guys back, and I definitely took a hiatus, so I appreciate the vacation. It was just one of those things where, I needed to get away and get some vacation time in and see some mountains, breathe some different air. So it was a lovely vacation, but I certainly missed all of you and this special time we have together. I am doing kind of a weird pod today. This one is actually about Baskerville, which is a slapstick take on The Hound of Baskerville. So I just wanted to preface this by saying that this play in particular came into my life a few years back and was one of the first dramaturgical projects that I worked on. And I just fell in love with it because I have such an appreciation for Arthur Conan Doyle and the legacy in literature that he left us. And so I just wanted to take some time to appreciate him as well. So we're not going to jump straight into the story today. We're actually going to take it back a couple hundred years so that we can meet our playwright who inspired not just Baskerville, but so many other adaptations, film, TV, that have gone around this same storyline and have revolved around the same story. And I think it's really important to know where all of this came from and about the person who created it. So that's kind of what we're in for today. And then, of course, I'll be diving in to talk about the theatrical aspects of the show, which are equally as exciting. And I hope you enjoy. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is a household name, but it was a long journey to become the world-renowned author that we're familiar with. He was born Arthur Ignatius Conan Doyle. Ignatius, I just love saying that. I know it's a ridiculous name, but it was Scotland in 1859, so what do you want? And he had a terrible childhood. It was really rough because Arthur grew up with an unstable alcoholic father, but thankfully his mother Mary was very kind and had a passion for books and storytelling. So that, combined with her fierce love for her son, created a spark in Arthur that carried him through the rest of his life. And he actually credited her with his love of literature. He once said, "In my early childhood, as far as I can remember anything at all, the vivid stories she would tell me stand out so clearly that they obscure the real facts of my life." I just find that so beautiful and relatable. So he had a great relationship with his mom, but his dad was a tyrant. So she was good to him, but you can only imagine the mommy issues growing up in that house. That's all I'm saying. Arthur graduated from boarding school at 17 and received his graduation present, which was signing the papers to have his own father committed to an asylum. That's like every teenager's perfect birthday gift. But his father had been sent to a group home a few years before to get help with his drinking and then continued having violent outbursts towards other patients. So Arthur's father was considered unfit to make decisions regarding his own mental health, which made Arthur the head of the Doyle household at 17. And yeah, this is all horrible, but the asylum his father was committed to inspired much of Arthur's first work, which was The Surgeon of Baskerville. It always seems that great art comes from great pain. If you look at photos of the asylum his father was in, it's bizarre. I mean, it looks like something straight out of a horror movie, what you would picture an asylum in the 1800s to look like. It's horrifying. So though his family had a long history of professional artists and writers, Arthur decided he wanted to go into the medical field and practice botany and surgery, which at the time went hand in hand. Practical botany today would be considered the development of learning to use plants to create medicinal remedies. So he was essentially into surgery as well as pharmaceuticals. This was at the time when they were just starting to develop the basic ideas of vaccines and all kinds of things. So that was the direction that he wanted to go into. But around this time, he also renounced the Catholic faith and became a vocal agnostic. Throughout his life, Doyle was initiated as a Freemason twice and left twice, and he had consistent interest in the mystical unknown. This interest grew into a passion as he declared himself a spiritualist. A spiritualist is really what we would think back in this time period. How do I describe it? It's so fascinating to me. These were people that were very invested in mediums, so having seances to connect with spirits from who have passed on. So when you think about like opium dens and them sitting around and communicating with the dead, it was a really interesting period of time in like the spiritual faith. I'm having a hard time figuring out the best way to describe it, but the spiritualistic aspect to religion. But it drew on a lot of those ideas and was much more focused on ghosts and communicating with the afterlife and using that as like a guide or a spiritual guide for them. So it was a very interesting thing for him to transition to after Catholicism and all of that. I just find it fascinating. That's where he ended up. But it does come through a lot in his works. So Arthur actually did himself make many attempts to speak to the dead, saying that it gave him peace to have an open channel to the afterlife. Doyle attended medical school at the University of Edinburgh, and this is where he met his biggest influence, Dr. Joseph Bell. Bell was described as a master at observation, logic, deduction, and diagnosis. His personality and his appearance obviously made an impression on a young Arthur because he is 100% the idea of Sherlock Holmes. So Sherlock and Watson were first introduced to us in A Study in Scarlet, which was published in 1888. The kind of a little bit of history behind A Study in Scarlet, just as like the synopsis is Dr. Watson, he's looking for a place to live and he sees 221B Baker Street, the residence of Sherlock Holmes, and it's suggested to him that he moves in. So the fact that he's a consulting detective is quickly revealed. Watson begins to attend the crime scenes with Holmes, and together they solve a murder mystery with the help of the Baker Street Irregulars, which is the group of homeless people that Holmes has a relationship with. So obviously this is a very good starting point for any Holmes storyline. In fact, it was the most inspiration behind how the TV show was created as well, is The Study in Scarlet. I do want to mention, I'm going to talk about the TV show in this. I know it's theater, but the TV show is so theatrically amazing and so on point with the original content of Sherlock Holmes. So I just have to keep saying like that that show is a great explanation. Each of the episodes is actually based off of a different book. So each mystery, it comes out in that like hour and a half, 2 hours that we're used to in the TV show. So this story broke so many contemporary rules of crime writing at the time. The thrill of reading Sherlock Holmes comes from Doyle giving the reader all the same information that Watson has, but by throwing in a red herring, the reader would often not come to the same conclusions as Sherlock and Watson. So he would be telling you this story and you're hearing it all from Watson's point of view, but you're also getting all of the misinformation that takes them on a different direction. So in Law and Order, it'd be, we're seeing that they're interviewing this one person who leads to this next person that they think is guilty. And the formula is that there's that red herring that's taking you away from the person that actually did it. So somehow they get misdirected. And that's the red herring, is that you're chasing one lead and it's a wild goose chase, essentially. So what was so fascinating with Doyle is in A Study in Scarlet, this is the first time we're introduced to this type of crime writing. Prior to this, it was very much that you knew the entire story and you're watching it unfold. So the audience was much more involved, the detective, and actually knew what was going on. So you would get a narrative of the villain as well. So he totally changed that whole mindset and the way that people read through the books, which was really exciting. along those lines, it's often said that Arthur Conan Doyle had created a new variety of fiction, and he was by all accounts the creator of the mystery genre, because the reader wouldn't know who the murderer was until the last few pages of the novel. Our very own playwright for the show that we're talking about this evening, which is, or whatever time of day you're listening to this, his name's Ken Ludwig, and he's the one who wrote Baskerville. And he said the detective and his sidekick, the locked room mystery, the clues, red herring, the bungling policeman, and the grateful client. He virtually invented all of it. So that the formula that we love to follow, and I'm a huge true crime person as well, that whole discovering as you go through the story, drawing your own conclusions, we owe all of that to him. So after this tale of the Study in Scarlet gained popularity, Arthur's career started to become kind of fragmented. Not only did he want to make money writing, but he also wanted to be a well-respected writer. So as popularity for the detective duo exploded, he received a deal with the Strand magazine. So the Sherlock stories were released as mini episodes in this magazine, allowing for dramatic cliffhangers week to week. And so it's really like our first mystery episodic, right? And with these multiple issues, it really created a desire for more of this mystery writing. So as the money began to come in for these stories, Arthur decided to give up what was left of his medical practice, which wasn't much at the time, and write full time, because that's where his passion really was. So Doyle produced a substantial amount of published writing within his lifetime. He became really quickly frustrated with the popularity of what he considered a, and I quote, mundane piece of his writing. He wrote about 21 novels, 150 short stories, and 3 volumes of poetry. But he was afraid the fame of such a simplistic story as the Sherlock Holmes mysteries would pigeonhole him in what he called shallow fiction, which is really interesting. I think it's hilarious that he got what all writers want, right? Which is this notoriety and a series that's been picked up. To me, that'd be like J.K. Rowling being like, oh, now I'm going to be pigeonholed in Harry Potter, right? Oh, what a terrible thing to be associated with this masterpiece, this like genre defining novel. As any sane writer would do, Arthur decided to kill off his most beloved character because he didn't see another way out. So in 1893, Sherlock Holmes plummeted to his death alongside his greatest opponent, Moriarty, in The Final Problem. So this was the 1893 release, and it was supposed to be the final chapter. And Doyle's readers were horrified. They loved these stories. And if you think about it, they've been reading it episodically, so they're thinking it's just going to be another cliffhanger, and then they kill off Holmes, right? It's like, where do you go from there? But to pad his pockets, Doyle decided to write a play about Holmes. So he was like, all right, this whole other writing indie work stuff isn't really happening for me. I'm going to just do something that's going to be easy and make some money off of it. So he wrote a play, and he was getting feedback about it from a friend of his when a friend asked to make some adjustments to the Sherlock Holmes, quote, persona. When approached about the adjustments, Doyle responded, "You may marry him, murder him, or do anything you like to him." So he really felt that these stories were withholding him from being taken as a serious author, and he developed a visceral resentment to this creation. So this is where the original story for tonight's inspiration, The Hound of the Baskervilles. Originally, it wasn't going to be a Sherlock story. Doyle had been inspired during a visit to the Devonshire moors to write a new mystery thriller, and then he realized while he was writing it that his story needed a protagonist. So rather than create a new one, he put Sherlock and Watson back into the fray as a prequel to The Final Problem. And this new novel was based on local folklore from the time. It was rumored that a particularly evil man named Richard Cable had allegedly killed his wife and sold his soul to the devil. When he died, he was buried near the moors. It's said that the night of his burial, a phantom pack of hounds came to howl at his tomb. And after that night, the locals said you could see him leading the pack as they hunted for flesh to devour. Super gross. Doggies don't do that. Doggies are puppies. I can't even. But it's fine. So This was purely the inspiration for the story, and the photos of the Moors are just as creepy as you would imagine. Flashing to the TV show, they did this episode almost like scene for scene from the novel, with some technological updates, which is really cool. One of my favorite things was the Strand newspaper did advertise for this novel on behalf of Arthur Conan Doyle, and the advertisement read, "This adventure of the great detective, whose reappearance has so long been hoped for, will be found equal, if not superior, in vivid and thrilling interest to the best of those which first made his name celebrated all over the world." Doyle began to study and soon act on his knowledge of investigation in 1906 when he worked with the police to exonerate a young man who was wrongfully accused of mutilating animals. Doyle's work with the police department helped him establish a way to correct injustices. And a few years later, the King of England knighted Sir Arthur Conan Doyle for services to the crown during the Boer War. No, it's not like boring. It's Boer, Boer War. I know, it's really uncomfortable to say. Anyway, yes, on top of going through medical school to become a practical botanist and surgeon, as well as writing full-time, Doyle also managed to volunteer for service to the crown during a war. The reason for his knighthood was an editorial that he actually wrote regarding the horrible access to resources and other negative circumstances affecting the troops. It was very well received and created a new discussion on the price of war. So to say this man was busy during his lifetime doesn't even begin to cover it. And what I find so fascinating is that not only did the crown acknowledge these issues, but he was given a medal for bringing them to their attention, for writing such an eloquent editorial piece that gave a frontline view of what these soldiers were actually dealing with, because it wasn't being recognized by the crown at the time. So it's such a fascinating way to look at journalism, that this is a man who was a novelist, and he used his skill to better the world in this way, which is just wonderful. While the partnership of Sherlock and Watson is a well-known one, and their adventures have been shared over time, The Hound of the Baskervilles has been retold in film, on stage, and TV over 20 times, including the super amazing version that I can't shut up about with Benedict Cumberbatch. But if you remember the adorable PBS show Wishbone, they also had an amazing parody of Baskerville. Highly recommend YouTubing that. But my question was, why is this a story that people love to retell? And if you ask our playwright for tonight's show, Ken Ludwig, he would say Conan Doyle wrote it with his usual instinct for just a whopping good story. He also went on to describe how this is a story not unlike some of our other favorite adventure classics, The Hobbit, Treasure Island. I'm sure you have some stories that have forced you to keep turning the pages to find out what happens next. And this is just what the original story for Baskerville provides. As Ken Ludwig said, it contains a villain who reaches deeply into our subconscious. It touches on the darkness in each of us. The hound is mysterious, and there's a hound in all of us. I know. Shit just got deep. So how did Ken Ludwig look at this mystery thriller and say, I know, I'm going to make this into an endearing slapstick comedy with a few cast members and too many characters? Let's dive into a little bit about Ken. Ken Ludwig's work is well known in the theater. He already had 6 shows on Broadway and has had them produced in over 20 different languages and 30 different countries. He's won 2 Tony Awards for his first Broadway show, Lend Me a Tenor, and also has been awarded 2 Laurence Olivier Awards. I really wanted to get to know him as a playwright, though, so I started listening to a bunch of his interviews, and what I took away is that he finds great creative freedom in working with minimal sets and small casts. I would find that so much more difficult personally to write, but there's a different art form in writing a show with this structure. So he wrote Baskerville with the hope that it would be as much about bringing the art of theater to life as it is about the story being played. I know that sounds a bit enigmatic, but what you find when you see this show is that the set and the actors create a world that provides fantastic detail while allowing you to fill in the world on your own as well, which is this perfect blend of what Arthur Conan Doyle did in his writing in the first place, right? So he wanted you to be filling in the blanks. He wanted you to follow the red herring. He wants you to make assumptions about what's coming next. And all of that is possible and continued in Ken Ludwig's production because the set is so simple. It allows the designers to take this framework, which you've heard me talk about a lot. I love a show with a good strong framework and then freedom of expression. I don't want to hit copy paste on a show. I want to see what that design team has to bring to the table. So this show in particular is pretty spectacular in how he did this. He wove the tale with only 5 actors in mind. 3 of those actors play 40 characters, often switching between characters within the same scene. So while we might see this playwriting device as odd, it's actually been around forever. Not wanting to be held back by cast sizes, many theaters since the Greeks have doubled or tripled characters per cast member. What this means for the audience of this show, you're in for a roller coaster ride of laughter and even suspense and fright. The show provides a delightful adventure for the audience. The show is crafted on a delicate mixture of farce and horror. But what I think you'll find endearing is how genuine the retelling is while implementing the most basic elements of farce. For those of you that aren't familiar with farce, that the technical definition is buffoonery, horseplay, and crude characterization. If you are familiar with the 39 Steps or Twist Your Dickens, these are very similar. Baskerville, a Sherlock Holmes mystery, was premiered in January of 2015 at Arena Stage's Krieger Theater in Washington, D.C. But the show was co-produced with the McCarter Theater in New Jersey. So Baskerville played for about 6 weeks in Washington, D.C. and then moved to New Jersey to be produced there. So this show is still relatively new, and the production I was able to see of it was really fun and fantastic. If you like slapstick, if you don't enjoy that kind of farce, it's not going to be your thing. I love playwrights. I love writers. I love the way their minds work. And so I just wanted to share something about someone that we all know about, but may not have all the details on. So I hope you enjoyed nerding out with me about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And a special thank you to those of you who have recently followed and subscribed. I really appreciate your support. Some of you have even reached out saying that you've listened to every episode, and I can't even believe it. I am humbled by the fact that I know so many of you have been doing that. And if you have shows that you would like to hear about, history of anything that you are curious about, I am here to do that research for you, and I love doing it. So please reach out on any of the social media platforms. I am on Facebook as Hanna Wonders. I have a page there. I also am on Instagram at Hanna_Wonders_pod. So you can find me there as well. And then if you want to share this podcast, feel free to tell your friends. It's on Spotify, it's on iTunes, and YouTube. So if you're looking to share things, I try to make it easy. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of you tuning in, and I hope that I'll get to actually get an episode out on time next week, which would be life-changing for me. But until then, I hope you all have a great week, and I look forward to talking to you again.